Welcome to another data day here on the Logistics Life. Today we've got, of course, we got the Deaner, the main man himself, Dean. Dean, how you doing today, buddy?
Good, yeah, great. Yep, good to be with you as always.
As always, my friend. It's interesting what's happening out there, and I'm interested to hear from you what the data tells us. I've been speaking to, so I know last week when we spoke, we were talking about going out, reaching out to people, and kind of feeling around what's going on. The consensus I got, I reached out to 12 different managers and about 20 different sales reps. And every one of them, it's not surprising, but it's interesting. Every one of them came back in this negative kind of defeated state, if you will. And I talked about this yesterday on the podcast. Over the last 2 weeks, every night I've been reading Earl Nightingale's book, The Strangest Secret. I don't know if you ever read Earl Nightingale, if you're familiar with him. So Earl Nightingale, back in the early 1900s, he started like around the same time as Napoleon Hill and all this kind of thing. Nightingale Conant was one of the first major like self-improvement, personal development companies created. And his book, The Strangest Secret, talks about defining success. And his definition, he said, the best definition of success that I can find is success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal, right? And it's interesting because if you start defining all of those words and kind of put them into your own synopsis, if you will, it took me 2 weeks to get it, brother. 2 weeks.
Wow.
To say from, like, because my idea of success has always been goal achievement. Like whatever that goal is, right? Whether it be to be a better dad, whether it be to be a better husband, like whatever those goals are, it's not just necessarily monetary, but it's like, for me, part of my goal achievement this year was to be able to ride a snowmobile, right? And I achieved it without like being torn down and in bed for 2 days after, right? So it's all of these things. And then I started really looking at it because over the last couple of weeks, Dean, I've realized a few things. So number one, and probably the most significant impact in my life, is my voice. I'm realizing that when I talk too much during the day, so cold calls, podcasts, interviews, demos, all this kind of stuff, I'm destroyed at night, and the next day I'm a mess. And it's probably just the radiation and everything, that my voice box and everything. So I've realized that I need to change the way I sell in order to maximize my performance, right? And I can tell you, been very frustrated over the last couple of weeks with it because I'm thinking of the results, right? Over the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And now it's like instantly, and I got it on Sunday. And so here we are Wednesday. So literally 3 days ago. So as you could tell in my face, like I'm still vibrating over this strategy.
Right.
But it's really interesting because now what I'm focusing on is incremental improvements. So can I go from 60% of people to 65% to 63% opening my emails? Can I go from, right now I'm at 36% click-through rate. Can I get that to 40? And these are just the small little pieces that I'm starting to focus on as opposed to the bigger picture. Because I think, and especially, and here's where I'm bringing it back after only like 6 minutes of talking here. I'm bringing it back to the industry, right? Is we're looking at it as salespeople. And I think we're all getting frustrated because there's no results there, right? But are you engaging prospects better? Are you having better conversations? Are you disqualifying prospects better? Are you using things like what we're talking about today, data, and sprinkling it into your sales process better? See, to me, these are all progressive realizations. If they have some of the systems, if anyone out there has the systems that Dean has, are you utilizing it better? Meaning, are you just learning a little bit more about it each week and being able to compound? And it's funny because I was having a conversation last night with somebody. I've actually reached out to tech salespeople, because I realized after 30 years in logistics, you don't sell tech like you sell logistics. So I'm actually
Right.
getting
Right.
schooled by tech salespeople on how to sell. And I have
Hmm.
no issue admitting it, because
Hmm.
that's a progressive realization. I have a
Right.
tech company I want to build, so I
Right.
need to I need to
Right.
progress in that
Right.
field. So
Right.
I would love your thoughts on that, and then
Yeah.
we can kind of get into the data.
Yes, Dan. I've people say, how did you make the transition from being a truck driver to a data analyst? And I've, like I said, because there's very few people that can cross that chasm,
Yes.
because you're either a really, really good truck driver, or you're really good at something else. Like the, it's very hard for truckers. I won't say it's impossible, but it's very hard. Once you become a truck driver for a long period of time, you really disconnect from mainstream commerce. That's going to sound strange, but the more time in isolation, the less you're connected. You're in isolation all of the time. And it's very hard to make that bridge. Not because you can't, it's because people perceive you can't. Right. So people that you would want to go and talk to about another job and a career change, you kind of almost get instantly dismissed, because they say, well, what would you know? You've been a truck driver, or you're a truck driver. So I'm one of the few people that can have actually made that transition across this massive chasm between being a very skilled high mileage operator and someone who's reasonably good at data analytics. And the point is that I've been reinventing myself for probably the last 35 years. And it's a daily thing. You've got to, every single day, you've got to find a new way to do something. I was talking to my neighbor, and we were talking about the rate of change and how much things have changed since the pandemic. And I said, well, just look at how much has changed since the digital age, which
Yeah.
started in 2007 with iPhones. I said the rate of change of technology and the exponential learning curve we all have with new data and new data analytics technology is frightening. And now we've got this whole new wave of what they call AI, which I think is what I used to do 20 years ago with data analytics and machine learning and computer science, but they call it AI now. Um, that is a whole nother level of learning that we've all got to go through, because the thing that's been constant throughout all of that is doing more with less. And
Yes.
technology has enabled us to do that. I mean, Dan, every single day I'm on YouTube learning new techniques on YouTube, like new way to find shortcuts
Me
in
too.
formulas. So I've got more time to spend on core things, because there's so much noise out there, right? A lot of us major in minor things, right? We don't
Ah,
we don't
yes.
right? We don't major in the things that really move the needle, which is what you're talking about. I think you're trying to figure out what are the things that really make a difference, and how do I do more of it and less of the other stuff, because it is so easy to get distracted and start to major in minor things. And truckers are experts in majoring in minor things, like, because they have so much time to think about
Yes.
stuff, right?
Yes.
Without that interaction. So, reading books, podcasts, bouncing ideas off people, listening to other people at conferences. That's all how you constantly reinvent yourself. But right now, I think there's a really interesting challenge about why people feel so despondent, because that could be coming across in their call rate or email rate. Like, that negative self-talk
Yep.
is translating to prospects, but maybe non-verbally.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is we're in a really prolonged market trough that not a lot of us have seen.
Yes.
I heard a guy from NFI talk yesterday, and he said he hasn't seen a prolonged bottom of a freight market like this in 30 years of it being in the industry.
So
So,
I saw it in 2008 and 9, because it
right,
took almost until mid 2010, almost 2011 to really rebound. So if you
right,
look at that, it was
right.
probably mid 2008 when things started to slide, beginning of 2009 when it was just like right off the edge of a
Mm,
cliff.
mm,
Um, but I think we all I don't think we've all associated it the way we associated this one, because it
mm,
was like a
mm,
global economic fail. You know what I mean? Whereas this
right.
is just a soft freight market. But if you look at it,
Mm,
I mean,
mm,
it was horrible. I mean, so I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Dean, but for me, I saw way more cutthroat activity in 2008, 9, and 10 than I've seen
mm.
now. I think people
Yeah.
are just dropping rates. They're trying to stay alive. And I think
So
because a lot of them have banked cash from the pandemic.
And yeah, and we had Rico Muhammad on this morning. He pretty much said exactly that on our IQ show. He said he was still getting COVID rates on one of his lanes and he had to take a 33% reduction. He said
Yikes.
shippers are still looking for. Now he said that's I'm still making money. Don't he said I'm still making money, but there are still carriers coming in undercutting, and there are still shippers wanting to drive the price down because of
Yes.
what they paid during the pandemic. So I think that's part of it. And
Can
then
I
there's
ask you
this
something, Dean?
elongated tail.
Did you ask Rico? Because I love Rico. Did
Yeah.
you ask him how he justified being able to drop 33% and save his
Uh,
credibility?
yeah. It wasn't so much of a credibility because the shipper said, "Hey, we've got this rate. We've been with you a long time. Can you match it?" So he really didn't have a choice.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I mean, but would you so and
I
maybe
think
I'm
the shippers,
overthinking it, but as a shipper, if I say, "Hey, I got a rate and we're talking like 33% is a hell of a lot, right?" And
right?
this is the rate I got from somebody. We've been with you a long time. Can you match it? If they came back and said yes, my
Yeah,
immediate and maybe I'm wrong here, but my immediate thought would be, hold on a second here. You mean to
yeah,
tell me you've been able to reduce it 33%? You haven't said a word where you're very quick to come
yeah,
to me when rates increase, but when rates decrease, I mean, maybe I'm completely out of the
yeah.
ballpark
Dan,
here when
he
it comes to
doesn't.
that.
Rico doesn't work like that with his shippers. This was 33% from a COVID rate, right?
Got it.
So
Okay.
the shipper hadn't adjusted their rates down. So, and I still think even at the rate that he was getting, it's still a fair rate for the round trip
Okay.
because it's refrigerated and it's round trip. But the point was that he had to agree to take a lower rate because the shipper said, I can't ignore a 33% decrease.
100%.
So so it's a dangerous game though that the shipper's playing because you end up with service issues when you start to get down and start to lowball those rates. So
Well, I
um,
had a conversation with one on Thursday last week. Um, and I mean, we had been going back and forth. We had been talking about, a few different aspects of their business. And when it came down to it, we got into the nitty gritty. And I said, so I said, here's kind of what I'm looking for is, you know, obviously cost is of the utmost importance to you right now because they really got pinched. I mean, they lost 100% over COVID for like 2 years. He says, so he goes, Dan,
wow.
much as I would love to say, yes, I believe in relationships, he goes, I do because I want to work with people long term. He goes, I'm mandated by the higher ups. Like, that's what I got to do to keep my job. And I said, I understand that. I said,
Ah,
so what are you thinking from like a number perspective? Like, you have a rate you're paying. What would it take to put somebody else in the seat and get business from you? And my immediate sentence after that question was, I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but I need to understand. And I said, and the reason I
right.
need to understand, Mr. Prospect, is for this one reason. If it's
Mm,
$100 and I drop $100, I know that the carrier that's doing it is going to drop 100, which means I need to be prepared. If I'm willing
mm,
to play the game, I need to be prepared to
mm,
drop $200, which
mm,
might not happen. So if I'm able to drop $100, hypothetically, do the freight for 2 weeks to get your other carrier down $100, I'm out the door.
mm,
In all fairness and in full transparency, it's not worth it for me.
mm,
And he was like,
mm,
you know what? I appreciate that. He said, like,
mm,
I don't have very many people tell me that. And I said, well,
mm.
it's because they're looking at the dollar, not the long
Right,
term compound effect.
right,
So for
right.
me, the long term compound effect is I am going to give you a rate that's going to get done what you need to get done. If the market shifts, my rates will not change because of my
Mm,
relationships with my suppliers. So
right.
the only way the rates would change is based on fuel, not based on capacity.
Mm,
Whereas if you are playing with multiple carriers, you're in the end you're going to be paying on capacity when the market
right,
shifts.
right.
And it was interesting because that conversation alone turned into about a 40-minute talk of just shooting the breeze and him
Mm,
saying, like, "Hey, you're right. Like, I bring people in because I think it's a better deal. And then carriers cut, but then those carriers tend to leave me in the end." And I said, they
right,
do.
right,
I said, like, it's
right.
I think there's like 3, 4 components that we have to bring into what the cost is and what's the
Right.
future negative cost that or negative implications we're going to have by doing what we're doing now. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's such a dangerous game. Rico was also in the spot market this week, and he said something was really interesting, and maybe this is relating to what brokers are feeling. He said normally when load to truck ratio is down around 5, his phone's ringing off the hook in the refrigerated market, and it's sitting around 5 right now nationally. He said, but I'm just not getting the calls. And he said, I think it's dispatch services are in between me and the brokers. And he wondered about whether that was allowing brokers to, find capacity through dispatch services as opposed to going direct to carriers. I'd love to get your thoughts on it because I have no way of measuring that if that's in fact real or not.
So I do know after having Jory Myers on my podcast last month, I think it was, he said there was a bunch of rules that changed in the dispatch company world,
Right.
which strangled a lot of them. But you know what, Dean? As I look at it, and I understand human nature, and I understand the process in which humans work. And this
Mm,
is why I believe AI has taken off the way it's taken off, is not because of the cool factor, because I can type in 20 words and get an entire blog post written, right?
right. Right.
So, time saver, right? I can do other things. And I think, and, and people might hate me for this, but it is what it is. Um, I think inherently salespeople are lazy for the most part. Most
Mm,
salespeople,
mm,
they try
mm,
and do things without, like, they try and get maximum results without spending maximum time. And I think just when you said it, the first thing that came to mind, full transparency, is hey, if I don't have to find a truck and I can give it to a dispatch company and give up a 5%
mm,
commission or a 10% commission,
mm,
and I'm already in the 30s and I'm still making 20, but I can go out and
mm,
golf all day while I have somebody else booking my freight and I don't have to pay for
mm,
team members to do it, I'm doing it all
mm,
day long.
mm,
And
mm,
that might be what Rico's seeing. Now, I have no
mm.
justification for it. That's my immediate thought process when you'd said that, because that
Right.
makes
Right.
sense to me. If I was a broker and if I was in an agency right now and I didn't have a team to book my freight, meaning I was kind of that cradle to grave,
Mm,
I would probably
mm,
go to a dispatch company, give them 5 or 10% of my margin,
mm,
um, and open up that time to sell instead of book freight. But
Interesting.
I can
Yeah.
almost guarantee that most sales reps are not selling in that time, right? Like
Right.
we
Yeah.
look at,
Right.
the automation, email automation process these days, and we look at all these different things that are supposed to make our lives easier, right? I was reading a report from the Wall Street Journal this morning. No, sorry, Forbes this morning, and they have humanoid robots that are about 3 years away from hitting the mass market. And these
Mm,
robots are designed to clean, cook, fold laundry, and do these mundane tasks that most of us don't like doing, right?
mm,
Now,
mm,
here's my prediction for this. The most part, people are going to get fat and lazy
mm,
for the most part,
mm.
because now they're no longer going to have to do those things. So they're going to say to the
Right.
robot, whip me up this awesome meal. The robot's going to whip it up. They're going to have temperature readings. I mean, they're going to be pretty much like sous chefs and like cordon bleu chefs, because you can
Right.
program them to do anything, kind of like the Matrix, right? You plug Neo in and
Mm,
2 minutes later he goes, I know Kung Fu, show me. You know what I mean? Like
right.
downloading it neurologically. And
Right.
I see this as a very, very, very fast
Mm,
way for people to
mm,
get lazier than they already are, right? You think about
mm.
this for a second. You look at just the
Yeah.
health market. If there's a
Yep.
pill somebody can take to get 6-pack abs instead of doing the work, they're going to take that pill all
Right.
day long.
Right.
Do you know
Right.
what I mean? So I just see a lot of these things, as a way for us. And unfortunately, a lot of people, it's not a way for us to get more done. It's a way for us to
Mm,
get more of our personal things we like to do, right? Whereas
mm, mm,
I have to catch myself every day, Dean. Like this
mm.
isn't, I'm not
Yep.
impervious to this. I do a lot of automated email as well as a lot of manual email.
Sure.
I'm able
Yep.
to reach out to 3 times the amount of people in a third of the time that somebody who's doing phone calls that has to go through a
Mm,
receptionist that has to leave a voice, right? But with the time I've got back, I just double and triple down on what needs to be done. So my sales, my
Right.
programs, my
Right.
processes, my framework,
Right.
like all of that,
Right.
instead of saying, okay, I'm done now, I'm going to go eat some bonbons and be done with it because I've done my
Right.
100 touches for the day. Well, what if I
Right.
compound that and do 400 today? And then what if
Right.
I, I mean, even this morning I was up
Mm.
at 5 o'clock and I'm scheduling emails for the day because I
Mm.
know I have this recording with you. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so, and some people might be like, well, Dan, that's not right. And I disagree with that because I was up
Mm.
writing emails and hitting schedule for the time I would normally be on the podcast because
Right.
why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I
Mm. Mm.
maximize my golden hours for everything I do? Like it just makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, I mean, I have all these dashboards set up that make my life easier in terms of analyzing data, but I use the time I save, I actually use that to think more, like to spend some quality time thinking and digesting and reading. So it's not just about crunching numbers. I think you've got to purposely sometimes reflect also on what's going on
Yes. I love that.
around
I
you
was
because,
listening to Sabri, and another really successful guy out in Australia. And he says, I work 3 days a week, but the
right.
other 2 days I'm in deep development. And he goes
Mm.
like, that's sitting down for 6 hours and finishing a book and really
Mm.
dissecting it and reading industry articles, keeping up to speed. And it's something I'm playing with right now, Dean. How are you? Okay, so can I
Mm.
ask you a question on this? Because I think this is very valuable for people listening. You know, the time that you've freed up because you set up dashboards, I think dashboards are one of the best things we can do because at a
Mm.
glance, we can see what's happening. And if you watch it every day or you look at it a couple times a day, you can instantly see the changes. Um,
Yep.
so when you set all of these up so you can better perfect your career and what you do best, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
What kind of compounded interest have you seen by doing that?
Oh wow, that's a tough question. Um,
Like, besides the fact that you're, in my
yeah,
opinion,
it's
the number one person in the market when you want any kind of data or you want to understand how data applies to real life scenarios,
yeah.
you're the guy. And I don't
I don't
believe
know
you
that
could
I
have
could.
done any of it without doing deep work on yourself and really reading and understanding and
Yeah,
dissecting everything.
yeah, and being consistent. There's a
Mm,
lot of there's a lot to be said for stickability. You talk about doing scheduling emails. So in the last 4 years, we've built a really good marketing outreach program to our all of our media contacts. So when the bridge collapsed in Baltimore, it was no accident that I had 14 interviews that week, including BBC World News Live in London, because we'd been cultivating that for 4 years. Because people
mm,
said, my wife said, "Oh, how on earth did all of that happen?" I said, "Well, for 4 years, we've been marketing, sending emails, sending press releases, sending data. And over time, people begin to trust you because what they see is they see what you say resonating in real life."
mm.
So I don't know that I could put a number on it, but it's definitely compounded, Dan, because everything we say between Ken and I and Chris Caplis at DAT, for the most part, works out in the market. Like it's how the market performs. But we base that on fairly serious data analytics, like and deep thought and experience, and so it just doesn't
Understanding
happen by
how to put
accident.
numbers to reality as well.
Yeah, and that's why I would get back to where we started about crossing the chasm. The fact that I get out on the road and drive my truck, 2,000 miles to Louisville and back. I'm just not sitting there. I'm talking to drivers. I'm pulling up in rest areas. I'm watching. I'm talking to drivers. I'm getting a sense of. I'm taking the pulse of the industry. So when I come back and look at data, I can actually make some sort of an informed judgment because you can tell any story you want with data. The fact what you've got to be very careful of is that the data actually reflects reality. It's not you're not
Yes.
getting sort of conned by what the data is telling you because data sometimes looks way too good. You've got to question it and say, well, why is that? And sometimes my on-road experience actually helps me balance that. So I think there's definitely been a compounding effect. But a lot of it's just hard work, Dan. Like not hard work. I mean, it depends how you measure hard. But the one thing that we've been doing is being very consistent with what we do, and we've built a very strong marketing voice around the truckload industry over 4 years since we built our program here.
And I noticed, like, for gosh, the last 4 years that I've known you, every week I get an email from you with the market update, like
Right.
the
Right.
draft market update that you post, and every week
Yeah.
like clockwork. It's become to the fact, Dean, where I look for it
Right.
because I want to read it right away.
Right.
And it's
Right.
it's like no matter what I'm doing, I open up and read it.
Mm.
Right. It's kind of like
Right.
if
Right.
you've ever signed up to get emails, like there was a company in Ontario um, that like does mass discounts on electronics and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And
Right.
literally when I get their email, everything stops because I'm like, ooh, what do they got this week? You know what I mean? And or like the
Right.
Canadian Tire catalog I used to get on Thursdays in our regular flyers at the front. It was like when that
Right.
Canadian Tire Princess Auto catalog came out, it's like everything stops because you want to know what
Right.
is really
Right.
like
Right.
kind of the stuff you don't need but you want. Is around this week.
Right.
So I understand that. And I see
Yeah.
how building that engine over 4 years, some people look and will probably say,
Mm.
oh, it like happened overnight, but there's a lot of work,
Mm.
energy, and effort. And I think in sales, that's the same compound thing that we get
Exactly.
is,
Yeah.
the more you do, the
Mm.
incremental shifts and progression and gains you get, the better off you are. And I think a lot of us, you said stickability. That's one of my favorite words. Greg Reed wrote a
Right.
great book called Stickability. I absolutely love it. Um,
Right.
it's one of the words I live by because I've
Right.
always said, if you're going to put something new into your world, you better darn well make sure it integrates with your present process, or else you're never going to do it all the time.
Hmm.
Even like this podcast, it's gone from, we used to do an hour and it was like, okay guys, an hour is just, it's cutting into way too much of my day. Not to mention, you
Right.
talk about
Right.
analytics and moving with analytics. I noticed that after 30 minutes, a significant decrease in viewership, mainly
Right.
because we're
Right.
broadcasting in the middle of the day, the middle of the morning. Things are happening. People will want to come and get like a 10-15 minute shot of awesomeness with Dean, but an hour might
Mm.
be too much. And so, you
Yeah.
start with 30 or 40 or 50 people at the beginning, and after 30 minutes, you got 3 or 4. So yes, there's
Right.
diehards that will stay there, or they're
Right.
listening to it like, not necessarily paying
Right.
attention, but they're listening to it in the background. And so we adapt and move with the markets, right? And same thing with you.
Yeah.
You adapt and move with the markets. And I think one of the big challenges for salespeople is they're not moving and adapting. They're staying stagnant.
Yeah. But I think, and this is something that's really important right now, because you started with talking about feedback and people not getting the feedback. There's this negative malaise over the market.
Mm.
One of the things that, if you stick around long enough and you're consistent, is when the market turns, people are going to call you.
Yes.
Right? It's like Ghostbusters. Who they're going to call, right? They're going to call you because you were honest, you were trustworthy, you gave them good information.
Yep.
You might have lost the business, but you'll win it back. And I think that's the most important part I've seen when it comes to sales, is just being consistent. It doesn't work all the time, like in terms of winning business, but in the long run, it will work for you.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree. So I know we kind of went all the way around the aspect. What's going
Yeah.
on what's the data telling us this week, my friend?
Yeah, some interesting data came out this morning. The single-family housing start data came out this morning, and it's way down. Like in fact, single-family housing starts plunged, was the word that the market used, way lower than expectation. Single-family housing starts were down. Let me quickly pull up the data. I think it was down in the order of 14%. So now 12.4% in the last month. Permits down also. The fact that the Fed hasn't, decided to drop interest rates, I think that's causing a little bit of concern in the market.
Mm-hmm.
There's talk of them not even doing that. But the important thing to remember is, even though the headline this morning was that single-family housing starts are down about 12% month over month, they're still up 21% compared to this time last year. That's the difference of about 156,000 truckloads in March compared to March last year. It's 156,000 more truckloads than March last year.
That's a good number.
So
That's a good sign.
always remember the year over year numbers tell us where we're at, even though the numbers are down sequentially. That's a pretty good number. And we're up, and compared to March of 2018, which was a really good year, right? Very strong industrial economy. Single family, we've hauled 88,000 more loads this March than March of 2018.
That's
So
a good sign.
so you'll see the market is sort of, I would say, moving sideways. There are, spot rates are still bottoming out. Contract rates this week bottomed out also, and replacement rates based on earlier RFPs were coming in slightly negative, but single digit negative to almost towards parity, like where the rates they were replacing were the same.
Mm.
So there's a sense that we're in this bottom of the market, but the prognosis is it's going to take a lot longer to get off the floor, because some of the key drivers of truckload freight, like manufacturing, are still fairly weak. Like our manufacturing numbers aren't strong. Food production's down, paper's down, things that move a lot of freight. Those volumes just aren't there yet. So that's why I think people are feeling negative, is because they've been at this in a down market. They've been beaten up in a down market for a couple of years now,
Yeah.
and there's just no feedback. Like, you're not getting the feedback you would normally get from all of this effort because it's going on for a lot longer.
You know, you said something there that just struck a chord. So you said, in like the salesperson's been dealing with this down market. And then you have the other side of the coin, right?
Mm.
Shippers were dealing with what they would consider a down market, which was really an up market because
Right,
they were paying out
right,
their yin yang for freight for 2 years,
right,
right? So
right,
it's like
right.
you have
Yep.
this teeter totter effect where it's like,
Hmm.
shippers rates are skyrocketing, and
Yep.
carriers are living the dream, and now it's kind of flipped where shippers are living the dream and carriers and brokers are
Right,
kind of like struggling.
right,
And
right.
it's interesting because I'm, I think
Mm.
about which side, and not to like draw a line down the middle, but which side has a louder voice, right? Like you speak to some dear friends of mine that are shippers and that are manufacturers, and they're like, no, you don't understand. It was a bloodbath for 2 years.
Right,
Like we are,
right,
we have been good for 2 years, but we haven't even recovered the
right.
losses that we had
Yep.
during COVID. And you know, so we forget about that, right?
Yeah.
We don't
Right,
think
right,
in those terms. We just think this is what's happening to us right now, not
right.
how. And I was on a podcast with Alex yesterday, and I said, the reality is, I think people gouged during COVID. And he says, Dan, I did. He goes, I'll be
Right,
totally
right.
transparent with you, but a lot of people forget about that now. They
Huh.
forget about how much they gouged their customers and new customers and prospects during COVID. Because let's face it,
Right.
they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
And you know, I can sit here confidently and say I didn't because I was sick. I wasn't moving freight during COVID, right? So for me, I'm like, yeah, I'm out of that. I'm out of that world. But I can tell you, Dean, I probably would have. I
Right.
probably would have
Right.
been very enticed. I don't know necessarily if I would have done it, but I would have been very enticed to raise margins and
Mm.
crush it because I've done that before. Now, during 2017, 18, 19, I averaged a 3.5% increase to customers because I
Right.
didn't want
Right.
to gouge. But I don't
Right.
know. I mean, I couldn't answer that because I wasn't in it. I don't know if I would have jumped on the bandwagon.
But
I don't know. I don't know how that would work.
carriers carriers did too, right? They, I
100.
always have
Yeah.
problems talking about this whole issue of transparency. Um, Heck, nobody was talking about transparency when they were looking for $10,000 a container for you to move from Los Angeles to Orlando, right? For your big customer,
Yeah.
um, right?
Hmm.
So there was, you got to take the good with the bad, right? So I don't know that you can sit there and complain about how things are today if in fact you were doing that during the pandemic. You got to take your lumps, right?
That was big, and that was big, and Dean, I like that, brother. That stung. That was like stinking your hands in a hornet's nest right there for most
Yeah,
people. But it's true.
yeah,
It's so true.
right,
I love that you said that, my man. I love that you said
yeah.
that. So what do we got coming up next week?
Next week, an interesting discussion next week on our show with Melanie Patterson. She's CEO of Team Integrity. She specializes, small fleet owner, but she specializes, great story, former ER nurse, built a successful company, but her specialty is helping truckers, small fleets get into government contracting. It's a really
Nice.
interesting space. She helps write all the proposals, find the business, set them up. It's a really interesting space. She's been incredibly successful at it. So I think that'll be a good discussion. We've had her on before. She's a highly sought after speaker, but just an incredible success story. That's on
I
next
can't wait to
week.
listen to that one. I can't
Yeah,
wait to listen to that. I'm gonna have to get you to connect me with her because I'd love to have a conversation with her too. That sounds really. You know what? I mean, I think these micro companies, I think, are going to be astronomically important in the coming
right.
years, right? Because
Really.
I mean, you look at it like the contractor, right? You can specialize in one thing or be a jack of all trades. You specialize in one thing, you're going to help people in a better fashion and you're going to really refine your service and value that you bring to the
Right.
market,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for
Yeah.
being here, Dean. And you know what? I'm loving this, man. I'm loving this new format and I'm loving the conversation, buddy.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be back this time next week.